Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to my shop. Today we are doing pinch rods. I know, more pinch rods, but these are more traditional and much simpler, as well as one that's, well, a little bit different. Let's dive in. Another kit from Reed Tools. Let's see what we got in here. Bag of some hardware, casting, another casting. Let's have a little bit of fun with these. The kit comes with two of these blocks and they are identical. One will have one more hole than it needs, but it's better to have too many holes than not enough holes. Otherwise, you end up having to do a lot more work. Speaking of work, we're going to start smoothing these out. Now, you really don't need to smooth them out, polish them, and make them look pretty, but a lot of people are going to want to do that. And so I actually chose to just use a file. I'm actually using a very, very coarse file to grind all the surfaces down to be a nice flat and smooth. It doesn't take quite that long. I think it took me about 6 minutes each to do them down. I hit them with a coarse file, and then I can come in with a finer file and a finer file until I get a really nice clean surface. And sometimes they get really hot. So when you grab them out of the vise, be warned, stick something in, put them in some water, otherwise your fingers are going to get really, really hot. So you can see the difference between the rough surface and the shiny surface, and I ended up just leaving them all scratched from the file, so the scratches are all running in the same direction on top of it. I like the way that ends up. Taking off a little bit of the corner on the inside surfaces, basically just doing that with a fine file, and then rounding over the corners so we get a nice clean fit and feel in the hand. This is starting to look pretty. So now that those are semi-pretty, I thought about going through and actually polishing them, but then decided, just leave them the way they are. So now we can start focusing on all the other little hardware things. We need to actually tap in both of these holes, and they are really, really close to the correct size. I decided to ream them out a little bit and then come in, and of course I'm going to use the Demon Yellow brace to run them down and tap them out. I started off with a regular tap, but I really wasn't quite liking that. I ended up actually using a compression tap a little later. But they work out really, really well. The brass is very, very easy to work. And then you can come back through and chamfer for the outside edge so you get a clean entrance. This is the compression tap that gives you a much cleaner surface on here. Leaves you with a little burr on the top side, but that's really easy to clean up with just a chamfer tool and then a file to hit the tiny little edge on there, and you get a really nice entry point for that to come through. You only need to do this on the one side, as it just needs the one knob. The other one can just be left as a hole. You also need to tap a tiny number 440 hole. This is a small set screw that holds a pressure plate underneath, and this way when you drive the knob in, you're not going to be crushing the wood every time. There's a small pressure plate, and that one actually taps really easily. I'm very, very happy with that. You just need to have the right tap. And so here you can see the tiny little screws that has to go in. Unfortunately, the tiny little screw isn't flat on the top, so you need to chamfer it. And you want it to be chamfered because you need to have a flush surface. For the knob, we also need to tap that as well. It's another 1/4-20, and I'm using the same tap we used before so that we can then put in the set screw, and then we can punch around the outside to get a nice surface in there. So I'm going to pull the set screw up to the top so that it's very close to being flush with it. And then I'm going to come around with the set screw and depress the surface all the way around it so it actually will squeeze in on that set screw and basically turn this into a bolt with a brass head. This one actually came out really, really well. My first one on the other one was a little bit wonky off to the side. I wasn't quite perfect with making sure the tap was vertical, but this one came out really well. We also want to inset on this one. I'm going to be putting in a small piece of wood. On the last one, I just filled it with epoxy. That works really well, but I had this tiny little scrap of ebony, and I thought, let's use this. So I'm going to be cutting off a piece of this. We're going to start with it square, and then we are going to file it down to a round shape so that it fits inside of that. And it's amazing how dark this particular piece actually came out of an old organ that was being thrown away. The foot pedals on the bottom, the original organ actually had ebony pedals, and they were about 3/4 inch by 1.5 inches. Big chunks of ebony, so we were able to save those. So we're going to glue this in place, a little bit of epoxy, and it holds it down nice in place. We're going to leave the top bigger than it needs to be because it's very easy to come back and smooth that out. But we have to wait for the epoxy to fully set. So get that on there, pound it down in place, and really don't need a whole lot of pressure with the epoxy. It just needs to be a good fit. We're going to set that aside and go back to some of the hardware. There's a small pressure plate that we need to clean off a little bit so that it would fit down in there. But one thing we do need are the beams. And these beams, well, the total section needs to be 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch. So that means that each beam is 3/4 by 3/8. So we're going to rip down one 4-foot long strip of 3/8 thick by 3/4 inch wide. And it's pretty easy to rip it down. Just stay a little ways away from the line and you can come back and clean that up. So we started by planing one side, marked our measurement, and then cut down on the line. And then we're going to cut this to the length and then plane each of these down. I'm going to make my rods on this one 24 inches long because my last ones, the maximum size was a little over 24 inch. Make sure you use your head when attaching the end. We don't want it bending up. And then we're going to come back and plane it. You'll find some high spots. Make sure you hit the high spots and don't hit the low spots. And then use your head, just like always. Plane them down, joint them, and you get a really nice clean surface. You want the two of these to be the exact same width, and you want the total thickness to equal the width of one. They should slide through relatively easily with a little bit of wiggle room. You don't need a whole lot, but just a little bit on there. The next thing we need to do is actually prep the ends of this. You can see here is the shim stock. We'll be addressing that here in a moment, but I just want to make sure there was enough room for that. I'm going to put it in the vise at an angle, and we are going to plane this down to a point. And I want the point to be a little bit less than a 1/16 inch. I don't want to take it down to a sharp point because otherwise that's going to dent up. I want to leave a little bit on there. We are going to have to drill one hole in one of these blocks. So the one that we're intending on putting the set screw into, we're going to need to drill a hole on the opposite side. And this hole will be what the wood screw goes through to actually attach into the surface. So we're going to drill the hole on that and then chamfer it back so that the wood screw can set flush with the outside. We were originally thinking of making two separate blocks so that they matched, but we found that the price of casting two different blocks was exponentially more expensive. So casting one block twice was the way to go, better price with quantity. And that actually made these work pretty well. So we're going to drill a hole and pre-drill so that we can put in the countersunk flat head into the back of this, and that holds the block onto this one. Do the same thing on the other side and countersink that one in there. But for the one that has the set screw, we also need to screw in a small pressure plate so that the set screw doesn't dig into the wood. And so for that, we need to mark a little hole on the pressure plate and drill that out. This will end up getting dimpled a little bit so that the flat head will sink into it, and you have to kind of put the screw on a little bit of an angle, but the flat head goes in there and sinks into it rather nicely. It's countersunk in the casting, so it works out really, really well on that. Then we can attach that to the main body. The small screw holding the pressure plate can then get filed down and smooth, and you can get that little silver dot that looks nice in the system. Now that the epoxy is set, we're going to go back over to the knob, and I'm going to use a coarse rasp to start rounding this over and sort of doing a little cabochon to it. And I'm going to get it close to its shape and then come into the file. I'm also hitting the brass as well as the wood at the same time, so I get a nice rounded shape. And then I can use my leg with a bit of sandpaper and actually conform it to the round shape. I'm going to then go through the micro mesh plates so that I can make it really nice and shiny. And I want to get this up to a really good polish so that it looks good in the end. And that screw then runs through the block into that pressure plate, and that locks the stick in place. And so just like that, we have functioning sticks. But nothing is actually finished until you finish it. So we're going to finish it with finish. And for this, I'm using homemade boiled linseed oil and then a coat of paste wax. Put on as much as the wood will soak up, let it sit for a while, wipe off the excess, and immediately apply paste wax. I really, really liked how these came out. But this isn't enough. We're actually going to do another pinch rod set here in a moment, and we want to actually give you your bang for your buck on this video. I actually really like how these ones came out. They run really smoothly and are a really nice set. So for this, I got an old tape measure that I don't really need anymore, and I'm going to drill out the rivets on this and make those holes instead of rivets. Take the old tongue off, and we're basically just going to make a new tongue. Then I want to figure out exactly how long and how big I want this block to be. The plans give you a really close approximation of what it should be, but your tape measure might be a little bit different. So I'm going to mark off the general sizes on the end of this piece of red oak and just cut it down. And if you make it a little bit big, that's okay. You can make it a little smaller. Just don't make it too small at the beginning. And just kind of go to something that matches your tape measure and then fits into the plans. There's really no right or wrong way to do this. It's a really simple little dumb project, and you can make it out of any scrap wood you have. I'd probably say use something that is not ring porous. Something that is diffuse porous might be a little bit better for this because you're working with small pieces, but in reality, it's not going to have a lot of pressure on this. Next thing we want to do is put a corner on this. The tip will actually be more acute than 90 degrees. This one is about 100 degrees on here, and that will allow it to go into the corner and have a little bit of movement side to side and give you a little bit more accurate. If it's at 90 degrees, then any movement off of 90, you're going to be then changing your angle. So we're going to start with the outside corner on this. In hindsight, I think I would actually wait on the outside corner until I've finished the inside corner, leave a little bit more material on there, and that will become a little bit more apparent in a moment when I break off a piece, but that's how you learn. You make mistakes. And we're going to cut down this rabbet that runs in, cut down across the grain, cut down with the grain, and remove this piece. And then we need to actually conform the sole of this to fit the tape measure. At this point, I realized, oh, stink, I went completely against the grain. I should have put the point on the other end so that I could be pairing with the grain here. You can see how chipped out this is going to be. This is going to be a pain. So I'm going to remove most of the material in a large format, and then I'm going to come in with a file and rasp and smooth it out from there and get a nice fit to the tape measure. It doesn't have to be perfect, but close to it. The file and rasp actually worked out pretty well for this, though I wish I would have gone with the grain and been able to chisel it back. So in the end, we have a nice shape that fits our tape measure, and we can detail that down. Hit it with a fine file right at the end, get a nice clean, smooth surface. Then we need to mark off where we need to cut in. Now, the other side was more acute than 90 degrees. This one is going to be a little bit more obtuse. And here, oops, yeah, I wasn't supporting that. That's one of the reasons why I'd probably leave that end a little bit bigger. But thankfully, super glue covers a multitude of sins, and we can glue that back in, set it, and get back to work. So because I had this little piece, it just meant I had to spend more time being very, very careful. I would just, yeah, be more careful. Clamp it in so that it's actually held together with a vise, remove most of the material with a drill bit, and then come back through and just slowly wiggle it out. Cut down a little bit, drill a little bit, cut down a little bit, drill a little bit, take out pieces bit by bit. If I had left more material on the tip to begin with, then this step might be a little bit easier. It's just the most delicate of it. And it's very important to have your tools incredibly sharp. Take your time, run it over to the plate, and sharpen it down. You can get really nice, clean surfaces on this. You don't have to make it rounded inside to make it fit. But you could. This is one of those things where it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be good enough. There's not any reason for it to be absolutely gorgeously smooth, but the more time you spend with it, the better it gets. And the more detailed your tool, the more you can reach in there and detail it out. At this point, you really don't have to do that much more, but you can spend a lot of time really doing a lot of detail in this. The smaller the pieces are, the more time you can spend on them because there's just so much more you can do on it. With a file and rasp, you can get most of your cleaning, a little bit of sandpaper, and then we can put the tape measure in here, mark out where those holes are, drill them out, and put in a couple bolts. On this one, I put in round button head screws on the inside and then put the nut and washer on the outside. You could do a flat head and then file them down to get a little smoother, but I found it actually to work pretty well just to have the button head on there. And that's about it. Put some boiled linseed oil, some paste wax on it, and you've got yourself a tape measure pinch rod thing. 18 5/8 and 18 and, ooh, that's almost 6/8. That's out of square. 16 and just a hair over 5/8. And we're 16 and a little longer than 5/8. So I did these ones dovetailed. This is just a really, really cool design. It is not something that's really functional or usable. It's just a really interesting design that I absolutely loved. And I wish that I had done this one first. This is a very traditional style. These are pinch rods that you'll see all the time and used to be in pretty much every toolbox out there. It's a really, really easy design that works phenomenally well. It's easy to make, easy to function, and it's just a very cool design for it. But then Jeff brought this one to my attention, and I kind of like this. It is a dedicated tape measure that now is a functional pinch rod. And you can measure from corner to corner. You can measure interior measurements easily with it. And it gives you kind of all of the variety of this, but just in a different form factor. And we do have plans available for all of these, as well as kits for these if you'd like to get those. Jeff has gone and put a ton of work into the plans, particularly for this design. But yeah, if you would actually like to see more about what are pinch rods, how do they use, the history behind it, because these used to be incredibly common. They were something you could find in pretty much every toolbox out there. And they've kind of gone by the wayside, and it's one of these things I wish we would bring back because they do have a lot of uses. So if you want to see more about that, I have whole videos dedicated to what are pinch rods and how to use it, as well as building the last one and these. And there's all sorts of links down below where you can get the plans for them or you can buy the kits. So thank you. If you would like to find out more about those, throw comments down below. We do read through all of them. Jeff also answers a lot of the questions on there, so if you have something specific for him, that's a great place to put it. Whenever you put a comment down below, you are actually helping the channel, so thank you. As well as hitting the like, share, subscribe, all of those things. They do get us in front of more people, and it is a great way for this channel to grow. Thank you for that. That means a lot. On top of all of that, you may notice that there are a bunch of people scrolling over here on the side. They are all the patrons on Patreon. They are the ones who are funding this channel and making this happen. With patrons, as well as members of the channel who click the little join button down below, without you guys, we wouldn't exist. So thank you to patrons and members. We are completely sponsored by you, the viewer. That means a lot to me, and I hope it does to you too. If you'd like to find out more about that, you can find information about Patreon down below, or click the little join button and become a member here. We have special perks for both, and I think they'll do it for now. Until next time, have a wonderful day. Pinch rod. Oh, yep, it pinches.